Good morning, my friends, and welcome back. Great to see you once again. And here we are, my friends, day 2, our Autism at Work Virtual Summit. I'm your MC, our host, Orion Kelly, and I'm broadcasting live from the Bass Coast of Australia. For those not from Australia watching internationally, so I'm talking about the absolute bottom of mainland Australia. And I look out my window, I can see the coast, I can hear the ocean, I can tell you the skies are as black as a dog's guts. So if the internet goes, for those overseas, that means they're dark. So yeah, if the internet goes a bit dodgy, it's because it's just a beautiful autumn morning here on the Bass Coast of Australia. Okay. Although my internet's probably better than most of the city slickers because I don't use Australian internet. I use Elon Musk satellites orbiting the Earth. Okay. Now, I want to welcome you back to day 2. And after a phenomenal day 1, we have some back-to-back keynotes, which I think is extraordinary. And you may well go, sorry, did you say keynotes? I don't want to get into a question of semantics here on the premise that you can have keynotes. Does that dispute the purpose of keynote? Is it the keynote, or are there many of them? And therefore, are they all key, or are they just multiple notes? This is a question I can't answer, and I'm sorry, and I apologize. Nevertheless, here we go. This is our 3rd keynote. So it's key. In fact, it could be keyer than the other 3 or 2, but it's the 3rd keynote. This one's the keyest, I believe. And it's presented by Ultranauts, Rajesh Anandan and Nicole Radziwill. Oh, sorry, Nicole, I always get that wrong. I'm Orion Kelly, here to host this amazing session. Now, before I hand over to Rajesh and Nicole, I'd like to let you know that, as always, you have an opportunity to submit questions at any time during the session. You type your questions in the Q&A pane. You can access the pane by clicking on the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Other people's questions are going to appear in there. If you like them, you can upvote them, right, by clicking on the arrow beside it. And it's a good way of saying power to the people. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Now, let's get to our first. There's going to be, this is even more confusing. Keynote 3 has 2 keynotes, both as key as the first. The first is a 10-minute recorded by Rajesh, and then the second is a live by Nicole. Okay, so Rajesh Anandan is an impact entrepreneur and growth architect. He's the co-founder and the CEO of Ultranauts Inc, an award-winning quality engineering firm with employees in 30 states across the US, 75% of whom are on the autism spectrum. Named a Fast Company World-Changing Idea, MIT Solve Challenge winner, and Interbrand Breakthrough Brand, Ultranauts is reimagining how a company hires talent, manages teams, and develops careers. Rajesh is also the founder of UNICEF Kid Power, which launched the world's first wearable for good product and streaming for good service, and was named one of Time's 25 best inventions. Wow. Rajesh began his career at Microsoft as a program manager and then joined Bain & Company, where he focused on business incubation and growth strategy. For the past 2 decades, he's focused on social impact, including setting up and running UNICEF Ventures, an incubator for self-sustaining tech for good ventures. Rajesh has a master's in computer science and electrical engineering from MIT with concentrations in artificial intelligence, I like that, system dynamics and economics. Now, I'll reintroduce Nicole in a bit, but let's just get some information on her for you. So Dr. Nicole Radziwill is the Senior Vice President and Chief Data Scientist at Ultranauts Inc. She leads the development of new capabilities, including in data quality engineering, and designs new work systems to scale the firm's neurodiverse organization. Formerly, she was Vice President of the Global Quality and Supply Chain Practice at Intellex Technologies and a tenured Associate Professor of Data Science and Production Systems. She sounds like a goddess. Dr. Radziwill is an elected academician, you work that word out for yourself, with the International Academy of Quality, a fellow of the American Society for Quality, a past chair of the ASQ software division, and an internationally recognized expert in digital transformation and next generation quality. We'll be back tomorrow for the rest of the intro. She has a PhD in quality systems, has published data science and statistics textbooks used in over 30 universities, and is the author of Connected, Intelligent, Automated, the Definitive Guide to Digital Transformation and Quality 4.0 for ASQ Quality Press 2020 in brackets. All right, two phenomenal guests. First up, let's get to Rajesh. Rajesh.
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm so sorry I'm not joining live. I managed to mess up the time zones between Australian time and US time, but you're in good hands with my better half and colleague at Ultranauts, Nicole, who will dive a little bit more deeply into how we think about inclusion at Ultranauts and building capability as an organization, as teams. But I just wanted to say thanks for having us, and also take a few minutes to provide some context on how we've seen the evolution of the neurodiversity at work initiatives across a number of different companies, and how Ultranauts has approached the same arena. So we've been around for almost a decade. My co-founder and I started the company in 2013. We started the company to demonstrate that neurodiversity could be a competitive advantage in business. And our theory of change was very simple. Step one was build a commercially viable, successful business that could deliver better value for the clients we work with, powered by a truly neurodiverse team. And we focused on quality engineering. We started in software, we moved into data as the domain where we wanted to demonstrate that advantage. And then step two of that theory of change was to take everything we've learned about building high-performing neurodiverse teams and share it with other organizations to try to shape a more inclusive future of work for everyone. And we're well on our way on step one as a business, and we're just getting to step two of our journey. And this is happening in the context of a lot of other companies also trying to figure out how to create more inclusive workplaces and work practices for neurodivergent talent, based on the premise that there is an advantage to having different brain types on the same team. And neurodiversity is one dimension of the broader concept of cognitive diversity, which includes not just different brain types, but different lived experience and different thinking styles and problem-solving approaches. And there's study after study that have pointed to teams that are more cognitively diverse being able to solve more complex problems faster, surface more unique insights, drive improvement in a more continuous way. And as a recognition, and particularly around neurodiversity, there've been really over the last decade, an increasing number of companies that are trying to figure out how to attract and retain and integrate neurodivergent talent. Where Ultranauts is part of Disability In, which is a US-based organization, and that employer roundtable for neurodiversity at work has over 50 member companies, including many of whom are part of the Fortune 500. So these are big companies, not just little ones like Ultranauts. And last year, that group led by Microsoft launched a career connector, the Neurodiversity Career Connector, that started to consolidate and have one place that a neurodivergent job seeker could go to find jobs from companies that were conscious and mindful of neurodiversity. While all of this is happening, there's still a lot of work to do. You know, the current approach tends to be that there are targeted hiring for some roles for neurodivergent talent, but what does that mean? Does that mean other roles are not appropriate? Of course not. And so this is just a starting point. We need to evolve. There's a focus on awareness workshops and trainings to educate managers about autism, about neurodiversity, and that's a starting point. But of course, you know, workshops don't change behavior. We're all humans. We have a hard time changing our behaviors, and it certainly doesn't change systems or outcomes for neurodivergent talent who are brought into an organization that hasn't been designed with their strengths and needs in mind. We tend to also rely on job coaches, and Ultranauts, we don't have job coaches, but a lot of organizations do, and they play an important role. At the same time, they are providing a Band-Aid solution because the job coaches are filling gaps that are left by organizational practices and norms that don't work for everyone on the team, in this case, the neurodivergent teammates. And then there's a focus on putting in place accommodations, sort of workplace accommodations for the specific needs of neurodivergent teammates one at a time. And again, this is important to have in place, but it's also not a solution. It's also a Band-Aid because it's also hiding the underlying failures of the system of the workplace, the practices, the processes that aren't meeting the needs of someone who then needs an accommodation. And so it's important that as we celebrate all the progress that we've made, that we also focus on the real problems to be solved, right? So how do we move from separate programs for different targeted hiring initiatives and talent groups to just, objective screening that addresses some of the biased norms and habits that most organizations have, like a reliance on prior education or prior experience or certain modes of communication, or some of the inequitable practices that are embedded in many talent processes and in many organizations. Who can say that they trust their promotion decision-making process in their company, or they love their performance review process? Not too many people, and it's particularly important to address these gaps if we want to create a fair environment where the neurodivergent teammates, and frankly any teammate that's coming into the organization, is set up to succeed. And then we have norms in many organizations that just create anxiety, interrupt-driven schedules, last-minute meetings, a lack of clarity in expectations or directions. And these aren't really about neurodivergent teammates and the needs of neurodivergent teammates, but really about good management and good teaming and good collaboration. And we need to address those if we are to build high-performing neurodiverse teams. And as we're doing that, there also needs to be accountability on the organizations and the management teams that are creating the context for these teams to thrive. How do you know it's working? How inclusive is your organization? Are you improving? What actions are working? And so we have a long way to go. So before I hand over to Nicole, a bit of background on Ultranauts. As I mentioned, we started the company about a decade ago, and we are building a data and software quality engineering business. We've been growing at 30, 40, 50% a year consistently over that decade, some years more, some years less. But we've built a business that is seen as a leader, particularly around data quality engineering, for example. And our clients include a who's who across a range of industries, from Goldman Sachs in banking to CVS Health in healthcare to Disney in media to Salesforce and Slack in technology. And because of the value we provide our clients, we've been able to continue to grow and sustain that growth over time. And the reason we're able to do that is because we have a truly unique team, a truly neurodiverse team. We're only in North America, in 30 states across the US, from east to west coast, and a couple of Canadian provinces as well. 3/4 of our team is neurodivergent. The majority of our teammates are autistic. We have many teammates who are ADHDers, who are dyslexic, who are dyspraxic. We have teammates who are non-speaking, including in lead roles on engineering teams. And while we reimagined our workplace and our work systems to solve for neurodiversity, by doing that, we ended up with human diversity. So we have more females than males, including on the leadership team. And we're an engineering firm. 1/5 of our managers are Black, a higher proportion than at the entry level, and we're all in North America. 1/4 of our engineers don't have a university degree. 40% of our team were receiving government assistance before they joined. And across every dimension that you might look at the makeup of our team, we're just a group of very different humans. And so for us, we couldn't rely on one-off accommodations or job coaches or targeted initiatives to hire one group or another. We had to reimagine every aspect of our workplace and redesign our systems and our practices, which led us to a very different approach. And so I'm going to hand over to Nicole, who's going to dive a little bit more deeply into the theory and our practice around inclusion, and importantly, on how you can, quote, do inclusion. Thanks so much. I'm sorry again that I'm not there in person, but I hope you find this session useful, and thank you for giving us this time and the space.
Well, thank you, Rajesh. Phenomenal, undeniable. Some of the data and the results and the philosophy there, I'm just astounded by. I can't wait to hear from Nicole. She's here live to talk to us now, and I'll let her go for it. I can't wait to hear this. So, Nicole Radziwill, God, I hope I said that right, Nicole. Welcome, my friend. Please take the stage.
Thank you, Orion. Can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent. One moment, please.
No worries.
Okay. So the theme of this conference is building capability. So we thought that one of the things that we would talk about is relating to one of the most significant lessons. Actually, it's a group of lessons that we've learned in this first decade of Ultranauts. So, like Rajesh alluded to, what we want to know is how can we transform inclusion from an ideal that we aspire to something that's actually a capability. So what is a capability? When something is a capability, it's actionable. We know what to do next. Sometimes there's multiple things we can choose from to do next. But when we're building an inclusive environment, it can be really difficult to figure out what to do next. And, you know, based on the lived experiences of a lot of us here, we know firsthand how inefficient and painful it can be to be excluded, particularly at work. When you think about your past experiences, each one of us has probably experienced at least one situation where a coworker thinks they're being inclusive, but it sure doesn't feel like that. So what that means is, even if you work in a company that's committed, completely committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, kind of like ours, that doesn't mean you're definitely going to feel included or feel like you belong all the time. It's still going to be hard to create that inclusive environment. So we wanted to figure out why and figure out what we could do about it. Because inclusion is one of the forces that drives the universal workplace. That's at the core of Ultranauts' mission. To demonstrate the power of cognitively diverse teams, we've got to create an environment where each one of us can perform and each one of us can thrive. And if we're going to do that, there's a few things that have to be priorities. We've got to care about mental health. There's always going to be days like, for example, 3 days ago, when Google Drive and Google Docs changed its fonts and its color scheme just so slightly that it, you know, some of you might have felt this too, makes a bunch of us feel like we're sitting in a cloud of gnats. There's going to be days where we just can't sleep, or days that we have panic attacks and need some space and maybe some time to recover. We need to care about flexibility because we might need our teammates to cover for us if we have to duck out of a meeting or be somewhere else during a keynote, or help us to work to a schedule that honors our body clock. We've got to care about transparency because we don't want to wonder if we're doing the right thing. We don't want to have to guess about what we need to do our work. And we don't want to have to navigate around political players who are holding back information to protect their power. We've got to care about continuous learning because none of us are going to have the right answer the first time ever. Each of us has got a piece of the right answer, but without open dialogues, we can't get to our collective goals with ease. And we need to care about inclusion, which is a prerequisite to collaboration. We're not going to benefit from somebody else's viewpoint or expertise if we're not inviting them to meetings or sharing information with them or stuff like that. So while each of these things is challenging to consistently implement in practice, inclusion is super hard. And I think here's why. So for each of us to feel included and to have a sense of belonging, we're told that our organizational culture has to cultivate psychological safety, that feeling that it's okay to take a risk around people we work with, that there won't be retaliation, that there won't be negative consequences. But to get that safety, we're told we need to feel included and have a sense of belonging so that we feel comfortable to take a risk. So, where do we start when you got a chicken and egg situation like this? Well, one place to start, and this is exactly where we went back to, is to see what researchers say about inclusion, because as a professional community, they've been thinking about it for an awfully long time. According to them, inclusion is an intentional and an ongoing effort. We all have to create the conditions for inclusion all the time. And we got to do this to make sure everybody across all identities and combinations of identities and backgrounds can fully participate in the work. So for me, being able to fully participate means I'm not stuck on the sidelines being a spectator. It means that there's ways for me to get involved, ways for me to engage with those opportunities. So here's an example. Let's say I'm a customer and I hire people to do some work. Well, I can include them in the work by spending time with them up front, making sure they have access to all the resources they need to move forward. They've also got to include me in their work process, because without communication and the option of getting checkpoints, I'm going to be sidelined and I'm not going to be able to steer the work the way that I need to. So moral of the story is that it happens in multiple roles in your relationships with others at work. So this example shows that inclusion isn't just a manager to employee action, but it's many everyone to everyone actions. Other people in the DEI space recognize it too. Inclusion is action. Belonging, which is that comfortable, warm feeling that you get when you're around people who care, that feeling that's usually associated with team cohesion, that other people around you have got your back. That's the outcome of lots of incremental inclusive actions by many people. So we want to take action to include others because we want everybody to feel like they belong. We try. We might think we're doing it, but that's kind of where everything breaks down, because think about the advice you've gotten about how to create an inclusive environment. Number one that I've heard of is be an inclusive leader. So, okay, that's awesome, but how? How am I going to be an inclusive leader? And more instructions in that. Another good one is make sure all voices are heard. Well, great, but how? What's the evidence that a voice is heard? And like another thing to worry about is what do you do when those voices are just factually wrong? Another one is be an active listener, which is a little easier to implement, but I'm pretty sure I listen to people very carefully. I'm pretty sure I even act on their ideas sometimes, but I'm not sure those people would agree. Another example is seek out and include diverse perspectives and experiences in discussions and decision making. Well, it sounds great, but what if my actions to seek out aren't the same actions that somebody else might recognize as seeking out? And if I don't seek enough, some people are probably going to get mad and feel like they don't belong. So even when we have the best of intentions, we often pull off inclusive practices in incomplete and imperfect ways. And I think that's because the way that we define inclusive actions is incomplete, and we make a lot of assumptions. So that's the gap that we wanted to close at Ultranauts, because even with a firm intention to be inclusive, without making the whole concept less ambiguous, we're going to conflate the feelings of inclusion and belonging with the actions that increase the chance those feelings are going to happen. So inclusion happens on two levels. First is the organizational level. That's where policies for things like hiring and performance management come about. And then there's inclusion at the team or work group level. That's where we engage with each other personally, day to day. So within each of those two levels, there's three categories of actions. Each of them are centered around unblocking some kind of access. So we've got to unblock access to physical resources like access to buildings, materials like laptops, licenses for systems, that sort of thing. We've got to unblock access to work processes and information. And we've got to unblock access to the productive social interactions that are going to help us engage with and learn from each other. And within our teams, we're pretty much only in control of two of those 6 boxes. But here's where the conflict comes. We get our subjective feelings of inclusion and belonging from actions that are taken in all 6 categories. So even though we can only control activities, actions that we do in 2 categories. The feeling comes from all 6. So let's take a more pragmatic approach. If we're going to make inclusion actionable, we have to empower teams to focus on the actions that they can control. Let's focus our actions on those 2 boxes and make sure that as part of our learning together, that we give feedback to the other parts of the organization who can adjust the other 4 boxes to include more inclusive policies. Let's also look at feelings of exclusion and lack of belonging based on where the gap is closed. Let's narrow it down. Which one of those 6 boxes are we feeling excluded in? So it probably isn't all of them. And these gaps fit into a broader context because every team, every work group consists of individual and unique people. And we don't come into our teams as a blank slate. We're colored and informed by our past experiences, whether those are good or bad. Your day-to-day reactions are going to be influenced by past traumas, maybe even going all the way back to childhood. So some of us are going to take a while to feel included and feel like we belong, even under perfect circumstances. And it's not our team's fault that it might take us some time to get comfortable, because even after we feel comfortable in general, conflicts are going to happen. They'll make us feel temporarily uncomfortable. And that's okay. It's to be expected. So first, we've got to know what our base state is. What's the person that we bring to our team? What are our expectations for being seen and being heard? We need to think about, what do we expect belonging to feel like so that we can recognize it when it happens? One of the things that surprised me quite a bit over the past few weeks is that I've asked some people, when you feel belonging, what's it going to feel like? How are you going to recognize it? And people struggle to get that answer. So this is really something I encourage everybody to reflect on. Next, as a team, we form a team. We can choose and agree on the inclusive practices that we want to adopt. So at Ultranauts, we've identified 100 specific actionable ways that we can be inclusive to each other. And we've done that over the course of several years to solve the problem of vague, unactionable actions. So once we put some of those 100 practices in place, because you probably can't implement all of them, we can monitor whether they're working for us. And if they aren't working for us, we can adjust. At the same time, if we notice things that aren't inclusive at the organizational level, we can share that information with the people who might actually be able to affect meaningful change. But we can separate the organizational issues from the inclusive actions we can take locally to build an inclusive culture within our teams. And I think by doing that, we can all be more successful. At the organizational level, we can also challenge ourselves to see where inclusion can be infused into work processes. For example, one of the ways we transform talent processes to be more inclusive was to change the nature of promotions. Promotions can be subjective. You know, at a lot of companies, maybe they're determined by how well you get along with your boss or how skilled your boss thinks you are, even if they don't have a basis to know. In a lot of organizations, managers have lots of power. It's not always objective. So we intentionally shifted that power dynamic. Most of us want to be promoted based on merit, but merit is something that's differentially recognized. While one person might think we're ready for a promotion, another might have valid reasons to think we're not. And the answer, the reality, usually lies in the middle of all the opinions, in the middle of each of the perspectives that each of the evaluators provides. So we've shifted talent processes to be evidence-based, community-driven, and broadly supported instead of in very narrow focuses. At Ultranauts, your colleagues want you to get promoted, and they want to make sure you're ready. They want to help you make sure you're ready. We also want to make sure that you have a portfolio that can help you get another job if you want, because when you're at a particular organization by choice, that's a much more powerful feeling than if you're employed somewhere because you think nobody else will have you. Another way to bake inclusion in at the institutional level is by building a capability engine. This is a concept that's been around since the 1990s, but you still don't see it in many organizations. The idea is that we all have work experiences. We all have perspectives that are helpful to those around us, especially people who are a couple steps behind us on the learning curve. So How can we mine assets from the work we do every day that illustrates what good performance looks like, use those as yardsticks to evaluate our performance against, and then continually improve and head back into work to have more experiences to do it all again. This shifts the dynamic to everyone teaching everyone, which is inclusive because it enables more people to engage in full participation in evolving the business, the entire business. And we're within days of bringing this blueprint to the world and helping other companies do the self-reflection, select the inclusive practices, and continually improve them locally within teams while providing feedback to the institutional level. It helps us divide and conquer and brings us together. Most importantly, this approach breaks down an assumption that many of us hold consciously or sometimes unconsciously, and that is an inclusive environment is something that our employers provide for us, but it's not. It's something we all create every day, over and over again. And the fascinating thing about bringing these ideas to the world is that none of us who have participated in this process over the past 10 years could have created what we see today on our own. You can see the seeds and the threads of insights that so many people have brought to this process embedded in the way that, that this looks today. Our customers have even participated in shaping this by helping us understand their starting points, what can help us connect with them to create more effective environments for neurodivergent people. They've helped us understand the challenges they face in getting tractions in their own organization, building inclusive environments. And no single person looking at what we have today will be able to say, yes, that's my idea, because the idea is far bigger than any single contributor. And that reveals a really important lesson about inclusion, which is being heard doesn't necessarily mean that your idea was implemented exactly as you thought it. It means that you helped to shift or change dominant beliefs in such a way that the product of your team's work ends up different than it would have been if your voice wasn't part of shaping that work. But not all ideas from individuals should be implemented as is. Or you're going to end up with output that looks like this pepperoni, turkey, chocolate M&M pizza. And some people in a team are going to be held accountable to a greater degree than others. All of these dynamics together make inclusion hard because it's never a good feeling to be told, no, we are not putting a whole chicken on this pizza, even when it's the right thing to do. But you're not being excluded if your chicken doesn't get on the pizza. Other people around us help us shape ideas, help us test ideas. They help us see things we can't see, maybe that we don't want to see. Inclusion is about taking action every day and engaging in those dialogues that help us collectively get a better, richer, more complete answer than any of us can get on our own. So we end up with a product that other people enjoy tasting. Unfortunately, work too often feels like this. I, the employee, I'm doing something for you, the manager, the employer, and you're grading me. You're evaluating me on how well I can guess what you want and how well I can pull it off. But 99% of the time, that's not what managers want. They want the dialogue that leads to shared understanding because that helps everybody. So we need to shift from being included to get our way, to let our voice be heard, to being included so we can all get better outcomes together. What I'd like to challenge everybody to think about today is, what does being heard mean to you? What about being seen? How does belonging feel? Are you going to recognize it when it happens? What assumptions are you making about what an inclusive environment is going to look and feel like to you? When you're actually being included, what does it feel like? How can you include other people in a way that they can see it, that they can feel it? It's tough. And that's why inclusion is an intentional, ongoing effort that all of us need to make all the time. So we invite you to take that first step today and visit biodex.info to do some self-reflection. We developed Biodex to help us engage with each other in more inclusive, more meaningful ways. You can go in and fill out your Biodex, describe how you work best, bring it to your team, use it as the basis for discussion. So for example, some of the things that you'll find in Biodex is, what is someone's usual response time on Slack or Teams? Should you expect an immediate response, or are they really mad at you? That was a little bit of a stretch. Will somebody speak up when they have something to contribute, or do they need to be called on? Is it okay to put somebody on the spot without advance notice? Some people are cool with it. Some people, it makes them really uncomfortable. How can you draw out somebody's ideas and input or provide critical feedback and make sure it's received well? Those are some of the things that are in Biodex, including what does it mean to be recognized in a way that's meaningful to you? So at Ultranauts, when we want to know any of these answers, we go check somebody's Biodex. We just released a free web-based version of this so other teams can benefit, and you can set up your own at biodex.info. Logging a Biodex is step one in building inclusion as a capability, because it helps you understand other people's base state. This year, we're going to be providing more tools, more insights to help everybody reflect on how we show up for our teammates. So we encourage you to play along at home. And now that I'm at the end, I just wanted to mention something specifically to you, Orion, which is you got me thinking about key notes and keynotes. And I think my keynote is middle G.
That's amazing, Nicole. Can I say honestly, for starters, I'm in awe. I'm in awe, and I think everyone watching should be in awe of what you're creating and what you're putting together and what you're achieving. I'm a little speechless, and I think it's probably because, well, you know, in 20 minutes you've basically destroyed in my opinion, the entire system in my country. And simply because if you ask me, how does inclusion for autistic people look in modern day Australia, I would say it's a philosophy, it's a policy, it's a set and forget, it's a vibe. That's how I would say it. It's kind of like it's a picture on the wall, like the picture on the wall that get on the train. Are you on the train? Get on the train. It's like, well, what am I getting on a train for? I've come here to work, and I think that probably hit home. I want to mention something, but I just got to quickly, because at the moment, I think the only question that's been submitted is someone saying they think my term black as a dog's guts is a really amazing saying. That's not appropriate. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you. But I need actual questions for Nicole. So please go to the Q&A pane and put in your actual questions. Just Rajesh and Nicole have brought up 1,000 things, and I want to talk about that. So please, let's see those questions in the pane. But before we get to that, inclusion is the intentional and ongoing effort. It's an action. It's not an outcome. I'm repeating this over and over because I really want people watching to hear this, because we can fall into a philosophical trap for inclusion, in my opinion. So I know it might be repetitive, but just for people listening, can you just quickly talk a bit more about the idea of the importance of reframing inclusion as not only intentional, but ongoing and ongoing? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the place to start is by reaffirming that inclusion isn't something that our workplaces provide for us. I mean, in some sense, yeah, at the organizational level, you can have inclusive policies, or you can have policies that exclude one or more people, one or more groups. And, I'm not denying that. But all too often, we engage and work with the people in our immediate vicinities, people around us, from a perspective that if things don't feel good in that team, and we know our employer, we know the organization wants to be inclusive, a lot of times that can set up a cognitive dissonance, because we know the employer puts, they care about diversity, equity, inclusion. We know they want us to feel good. Why don't we feel good? And so what you have to step back and say is, all right, well, what does it mean? What does it mean for you personally to feel good, to feel included, to feel like you belong? You have to find out, what are the other people on your team expecting? If everybody on your team is just sitting there waiting for your organization to create a utopia around you so that conflict doesn't exist. That's not going to happen. Inclusive teams, there's going to be conflict. You just need to figure out a good way in advance to resolve it. It's not going to be the perfect, happy utopia that you expect, but it can be a very constructive place where it's safe to say what you feel, where you're not going to be criticized or ridiculed or, God forbid, fired just because you want the work to be better and you want everyone's performance to increase. So I think that's probably one of the core components.
Yeah, and a lot of that resonated with me from my personal experiences with regards to the idea that inclusion to me is really about the idea of the kind of appreciation or understanding that I'm different or I can do things differently, and in doing so, there's not there's no malice, or I'm not trying to be unprofessional, or I'm not trying to make any trouble. Like you say, like if I speak up about something that can be done better, but then that might be taken entirely the wrong way. And that to me is inclusion, and it works both ways, just an understanding between teammates. Because I agree, it can't just be about me demanding inclusion and just forcing it upon everyone else. In saying that, though, clearly, neurotypical employees are going to have a much higher percentage of simply fitting in and feeling a part of the team and feeling included, as opposed to someone who has, historically had trouble getting jobs and keeping jobs. That's just factual. But I think one of the big issues, as you say, the utopian thing is, I feel like we live in a time where everyone is becoming potentially fatigued by a wave of inclusion for every little thing, and as a result, that it's just pushback now. Do you know what I mean? It's like everyone feels slightly fatigued by that.
There's so many initiatives that focus on the feelings, but if you focus on the actions, then you can be a little bit closer to measuring how those actions impact performance. Feelings are great, but performance is really what you're trying to achieve, right? If I'm the head of an organization and I've put in a lot of time and effort and energy to make sure that I have diverse identities all over my organization, and yet I don't create an environment where they can fully participate in the work, I've just wasted my investment in that diversity. So, from a really feelings-free perspective, it still makes sense to create an environment where everyone can fully participate. I think where we have kind of, and I won't say get it wrong, because all of the work that's been done over the past 2-3 decades in inclusion has been really important in sensitizing people to the fact that these issues exist. I think that what we've tended to do is focus on the feelings so much that we don't do the actions, that we don't take personal responsibility and realize that we have agency in creating these inclusive environments. And sometimes that agency means recognizing and realizing there's some things in the institutional level that a lot of us just can't control. And so rather than getting really upset that we can't control them, let's focus on what we can control and create a good environment for each other. And then as a team, feedback that information so that the organization knows this issue exists, because maybe they don't know.
Yeah, and talking about the controllables, you talked about removing barriers to full participation, and how that obviously lends itself to inclusive practices. But I found that really interesting. I think that's just the case. I mean, there are barriers to someone feeling included, feeling like they belong, feeling like they have a satisfaction, they're part of something. And the barriers are different though for every single person. And clearly, 75% neurodivergent people. I can only imagine all the different types of barriers you've come across though. But I'm just interested in, the experiences in that for people, watching, because for me, it's I don't want you to fix the barrier or I don't want to get over a barrier of wanting to be a part of social gatherings at work. If you fixing, like, my participation in a social gathering at work, is that full participation? Because I don't want that barrier to be fixed. I just don't want to have to go to social gatherings at work. So I mean, like, full participation. It's a really, I found that really interesting, really thought-provoking. I just love to hear just some of your insights or experiences in the idea of removing barriers
Absolutely.
to full participation.
So I read this really interesting paper last week, and the entire paper was on the subject of, what does full participation mean for people who have recently had strokes? So, I mean, such a strange little niche of a publication, such a strange thing for people to be doing research on, but it was a really interesting paper, because what they studied was, they asked people who had had strokes and who hadn't had strokes about, what do you think full participation means? And what the answer ended up being was, full participation for people who are within a year of recovering from a stroke is not going to include the same activities that other people might think of as being able to fully participate. You may have to redefine the bounds of the work so that the participation can expand to fill the space that it's able to and that it's comfortable with. And so when you mentioned about, I really don't want to have to go to those company parties, and I don't want to have to fake fun around colleagues, right? Yeah, neither do I. But that maybe that's not part of the profile that I need to expect from myself, where full participation is included. So you bring up another really interesting point there, which is, how much of these things are expectations that we put on ourselves because we think other people want to see them, versus how much can the gap be closed by us just being open about, I'm really happy the party exists for all of you who want to go. Not really something that I enjoy spending time doing, but I'll see you at this other thing. I'll see you at the strategic planning meeting, which are always fun. I mean, full participation can mean different things to different people.
Yeah, great point. Great thoughts. Okay, these are questions now from our amazing attendees. Really challenging presentation. Thanks, Nicole. I'm just reading them verbatim. You've talked a lot about inclusion, but can you talk a bit more about belonging? You mentioned you asked employees and they were unclear in their answers. What do you think it is or feels like?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that we want to do is to be able to look at many biodex profiles to start extracting themes about what belonging looks and feels like to different people, to different, based on how you group yourself. It's really a different thing to everybody. For me, belonging just means that I have people to talk to about interesting ideas, who can challenge me on those ideas. And I know some people wouldn't find that to be belonging. They'd find that to be pretty threatening. What? You like people to challenge your ideas? Well, heck, yeah, absolutely. That makes me feel like I'm part of the dialogue, right? But it's going to be different for everybody. And I think that's one of the things that we could be sensitive to is, number one, sit back and think, really think. What are other places that you workplaces, maybe school, anything you could think of, places where you really felt like you belonged? What were the characteristics? How can you make more of that in the new environments that you find yourself a part of? You really have to. It's a hard question to ask, but that's really where we all need to start. Otherwise, we're just going to wander through our professional lives hoping that we feel belonging, maybe, and hoping that we're heard, but not really feeling like it, and just desperately wishing maybe this is the week we'll be seen, but then not recognizing when it actually happens. So it really does start with self-reflection and hard self-reflection.
Which is what you said when you spoke. I wrote it down. What does inclusion mean and feel like to you? And obviously, it comes down to each and every person really reflecting on that and then bringing it together. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And you know what? I'm happy to say that maybe I am a little bit resentful, in general, of the work needed to be done by the person themselves. A lot of times, maybe I'm lazy in that stage. I'm happy to accept that. It's like, no, what do I have to do everything for you? You work it out. But I think that's emotional. And what you're talking about is, that look at the data, look at the results. If we can get past that and actually dig deep and actually focus on ourselves and others,
But you might also be tired, right? Like if you've had a whole bunch of experiences, one after the other, that have just beaten you down and just made you feel just worn out by life, then it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to take people on your team or on your employers. It's going to take them reaching out to you more before you're going to start to feel those feelings. And just knowing that it might take you longer based on your past experiences. Like if I was to go into a new environment and I knew, all the people on my team are probably going to feel like they belong within a month, but it's probably going to take me 6 months, I'd be a lot easier on myself. So I would love for us to be able to get to a point like that where we can at least, bring this from a completely nebulous feeling to something that we might actually be able to set expectations for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. I've got to get on to other questions, but I love that. And what's gone through my mind is, I wonder, Nicole, if I have the ability, the capability, the capacity, the insight to come up with that 6 month thing and give myself that grace. I think, am I too hard on myself? Do I have the capacity to think that it's a profound thing? It's going to take me 6 months to process that.
Good. Then my work here is done, Orion.
This is a question from someone. What does inclusion for a non-speaking engineer lead look like in practice?
So this is interesting too. My more formal answer is that we do have a list of 100 inclusive practices, and sometime in April, we'll be able to bring those out in different ways to people who want to be familiar with them and learn how you can use them, so on and so forth. So that's my official formal answer. My unofficial informal answer is that I used to be an engineering manager on a team with a non-speaking engineer who was absolutely fantastic. But we didn't realize he was non-speaking for a while because he wasn't speaking and he didn't tell us. So anyway, so was the question about, was it about inclusion or belonging? Can you read?
Yeah, what does inclusion look like in that instance?
Okay, so we emailed with him a lot and we let him know, we're just going to email with you all the time. And you let us know by email if you have any questions about things, or if we're doing something that you think we shouldn't be doing, and you go do your systems administrator stuff. Here's the 3 things. Keep our systems running with these 3 KPIs. Everybody will be happy. Is that okay with you? And he write back, yeah, of course, absolutely. And as long as we knew that he was okay and he knew that we were okay, which we just had a touch base with by email every few months, he got his work done. He felt included. We felt like we were including him. And from all of the interactions over the 12 years that we worked together, I think it went pretty well. He was happy. He just didn't have to come out to coffee hour. He was super happy about that. And there were a couple people on our team that were a little put off, but like, can't he just come to coffee and sit there? And I said, well, why? If he's not enjoying it and not getting anything out of it, if he's going to feel better at his computer writing some bash scripts to do important stuff, why should he not do that? And so it was an adjustment in multiple ways, right? Getting the team to feel comfortable with their discomfort, and also letting him know that, yeah, if that's what you enjoy doing, if that's what makes you feel included, just being in your office and communicating by email, we're cool with that. And so what he said years later was, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel included that I don't have to do any of those things and everyone still likes me. And we did. He was great.
Yeah. And I mean, breaking news, everyone, it's easy and it's free. As long as you bring a coffee back for me, there won't be any trouble. Let's be clear. All right. Another question. A lot of comments just thanking you, by the way, for your presentation. They really enjoyed it. Just letting you know. Okay. Some of these don't make a lot of sense because it's not my thing, but I'll do my best. What would management metrics look like in a many model of inclusion diversity? Does that make sense?
I think so. And I think that's the project that I'm working on right now with a whole bunch of simulated data. So all I can answer is to say, yes, we're thinking about that because we want to know the answer too.
Okay. Now, for several managers, leaders, inclusion remains a concept, and many they will not personally, and many will not be personally driven by inclusion. So do you think someone's asking what incentives could be created to shift their perception of inclusion? I mean, I would initially, this is not my question, but initially just by watching the presentations, I would say the data and then the growth. But what's your thoughts?
So there's probably a whole universe of answers that could be given to this question, but my favorite thing is by having those managers, not forcing them to, but making shared deliverables that come out of a team something that the manager is responsible for. So, a lot of times there's this dynamic where if the team doesn't get it done, the manager can just say, oh, that team, they're not senior enough, or they're not this, or they're not that, right? No, you all share in this deliverable together. You're tasked with building shared understanding and providing us with the evidence of the shared understanding. And then if you, manager, come to us and say, the team isn't doing it, we'll say, what are you doing to include everyone so that they do it? So that's one of the things that's been moderately effective. Not all the time, but we're working on that.
Yeah. And I guess there's a few points here that they've pointed out, people who are entrenched in old, or let's just say, orthodox, neurotypical ways, in the idea there isn't other ways to do things. That this is obviously a challenge for people in, certainly in the country that we're broadcasting from, in Australia. Presumably it's not just here, but you've just talked about incentives and things, but broadly speaking, what have you found are the best ways to tackle, to progress, to unite, to bring teams together from all walks of life and all generations in that kind of entrenched in old, neurotypical ways?
So let me think about this from the perspective. I gotta put myself in the headspace of a previous job. So let me inside my head, let me pick one. So the question is, how can you bring people together to do inclusion when they're entrenched in traditional neurotypical ways of being? Which
is a pretty common experience.
Very common
for a lot of people.
Yeah. So the answer that I'm going to share with you is from a work group that I was part of, where out of about 15 people, 12 were neurotypical, including the manager, and 3 were either autistic, dyslexic, or both. So this is a mostly neurotypical group. The challenge was indeed trying to retrain the manager on why it would be important to work on inclusion and belonging in this group. So the way we did it was, he was very easily swayed by performance and financial metrics. So we showed him that all of his complaints about the neurodivergent people on his team could be resolved by allocating, 2-3 hours of this neurotypical person's time a week to do this thing, allocating this person's time to do this thing, and then showing him the result in performance. So it was a really emotionless appeal to have him just try it for a month and see if this doesn't improve your bottom line numbers, which is what you get evaluated on, we'll go away. But his numbers improved, and he was like, oh, all right, well, I don't understand this and I don't think it's necessary, but it's getting me what I want, so keep doing
it. And watching Rajesh in that small portion of time, he showed a lot of graphs and a lot of data that not only was the system working, but the system was growing and it was productive. And it was, I always try to.
It's still a work in progress, right? If we leave nothing beyond, do the self-reflection, people are messy creatures. We're emotional. We deal with things in day-to-day life. We have to bring our whole selves to work and get stuff done, even when we don't feel like it. There's so many forces going on and so many people interacting. This is a messy prospect. So I don't want people to leave here thinking, oh, there's an organization who's completely solved this and everything is the utopia. No, it's that we're taking a pragmatic approach to building and cultivating this environment so that everyone participates, so that there's full participation and ensuring full participation. And it's a learning and growth experience for everyone at all times. It's an investment. If organizations aren't willing to make at least a little bit of investment, it's not going to fly. But if we can show you make a little bit of an investment in this, you're not doing it for the feelings, even though the feelings are something that we want everyone to have. If you invest in inclusion, you get the performance differential. And it's hard for CFOs to argue with that.
And what more do you need to say to the people that are entrenched? That's as good as it gets. And I think too, but this is the thing, right? You don't want utopia or perfection. You want this win-win scenario.
It would still be based. Nice. I mean, if we could get utopia, that would be pretty awesome. But I think my utopia would be different than yours. We just got to deal with that.
I bet. Yeah. But the thing is, this is the way to look at it. The way you guys are looking to do things, because I think there's an older way, which is more of a tokenistic thing or a ticker box thing, or doing it for the wrong reasons, and of course wondering why it doesn't work, and that's something that's obviously very strong. Now let's get to a couple of more questions before we wind up. All right, so do you think that the use of technologies at the workplace can impact the sense of belonging? And I guess, if you do, how do you think?
That is a really, really big question. And all I can say is I'm really excited to see if ChatGPT-4 can do that for us, but I don't know. But let's all figure it out, because that'd be great. I would love to ask GPT-4, hey, here's all the characteristics of the people on my team. Please tell me how we can get that sense of belonging the quickest. Maybe it can do it. Who knows? Let's try. Everybody should try if you want to do.
I'm fascinated by all this, by the way, the AI component of all this type of stuff. And it's but it is. And I really love the idea that you're even mentioning it or bringing it up. And because I'm a content creator, right? Like I make YouTube videos and podcasts and things. And as soon as the chat GPT thing kind of came out, and there's a free stuff, I already started to utilize it for content creation, for ideas, and for different parts of my role. And I found that it's been astoundingly helpful, and in many ways it's providing me with more productivity and actually more success. And so it's quite amazing how it's helped me, and potentially how it can help many other people. And it's just a brand new thing. And so I've really found that fantastic.
Totally agree. Yeah.
All right. Let's see now. I'm not. This is a question I've got for you. I'm going to do my best. I'll be honest. It does say at the start in brackets, not sure if this makes sense. So I apologize. How do we manage the changing of a person's neurodiverse needs best, periodic or lasting, to ensure we're always encouraging belonging in our actions? Example, considering generational diversity for sufferers of dementia, etc. Does that question make sense?
I think so. And I'm going to give a really unsatisfying answer of how we deal with things like that. We don't assume that everyone's needs and preferences are static. So, I mentioned biodex.info. What we ask all of our team members to do is, when you join a new team, or when your team stops the work that it's doing, whenever team composition changes, go back and reflect on your own needs and preferences again. And sometimes, let's say here's an easy one, right? Let's say you had a really bad bout of COVID, and your brain fog is lasting a long time. Well, you might not have known about that 6 months ago when you updated your biodex, but when you update it this time, go through and reflect on which of the inclusive practices might actually be helpful to you, which ones might actually be the difference between being able to do your job and not, and just establish those as baseline preferences. And then when the team creates its working agreements, they weave those in, and there's no penalty that your preferences have changed. It's just an acknowledgement that time goes on, people change. Sometimes people get over things that were really important to, have to have inclusive practices around before. Certainly the ways that I feel included in teams and work groups now is totally different than how it would have been in my 20s. Totally different. So accepting that we're going to grow and change and maybe even end up at times dealing with the brain fog from COVID or dealing with issues related to dementia. It's just a natural part of human existence, and let's accept that with each other.
Yeah, I think as an autistic person, I always, from my point of view, I'd almost say that my needs could change depending on the time of year, depending on
easily.
the pressures I'm under, the work stress, the family stress.
Yep.
And do you think it's realistic for businesses to be able to, for organizations to be able to manage that, as in, provide an inclusive environment where it can actually manage the changing needs of a neurodivergent person on a potentially daily, weekly, monthly period, or is that unrealistic?
Again, let's shift from feelings into the fact domain that CFOs like. On average, for most staff level people, it costs between $14,000 and $20,000 every time somebody quits. That whole process of going through trying to find people and go through resumes and hiring, and hires that don't work out, there's always a risk associated with. You hire somebody and you don't find out that they actually can't do the job, and then you lose work. There's all these different ways that you can factor in those losses into your model. Long story short is retaining neurodivergent employees is a lot cheaper than having to cover the cost and the risk of new hires. So might it be a little bit of a time and effort investment to go through and work on inclusive practices and making sure we self-monitor? Yes, but it's a lot cheaper than the financial alternative. That'd be the way I'd handle it.
And I think that's a great way. Look, we're reaching the end here, and I just can't thank you enough for your time and for your insights. They've just been incredible. I have really enjoyed it. For those watching,
it's been delightful to meet you too. Thank you so much for emceeing.
It's been great to chat. I appreciate you being here. I'll just parting remarks from yourself. Just for those watching, you were talking about your services and some things that they can access and things that can. Before we go, just want to quickly remind everyone of how they can look into some of the things you've been talking about.
Absolutely. So the website for the company is ultranauts.co. Do I need to spell Ultranauts? Like no. Astronauts, but ultranauts.co. And then you can find out more about Biodex either by going to ultranauts.co or straight to it, biodex.info. And you can see what the questions are.
Hey, thank you so much, Nicole.
Yeah,
and thank you to
too.
Rajesh. Plus, pass on our best.
I will.
We really do appreciate it. It's been great. See you later, Nicole, and thank you, Rajesh. Now, let me wrap this up, my friends, before we move on to our next keynote. Okay, so once again, just thank you so much to Rajesh and Nicole. Absolutely fantastic. If you've got some feedback, please take a minute to complete the session feedback form. You can access that via the tab on the right. Our next session in about 5 minutes or so is our final keynote, brought to you by Vanessa and Lucy from Social Cipher. This is amazing. You do not want to miss this one. These guys are phenomenal. To get there, click back to the homepage or the agenda page. You'll see the session listed as starting soon. When you're ready, you click on the link. It'll take you into the session, and I will be there to greet you, my friends. So I'll see you, I guess, in a few minutes.